Masechet Zevaḥim Daf Mem Gimel Nu Mishnah Ve'elu devarim she'en chayavim alehem mishum pigul hakometz ve'haketoret ve'halevona. We are now going to list a number of items that, if someone eats them, they will not be liable to karet for eating pigul. Let's explain some of the background. Let's take a standard case of a meal offering where the Kohen takes a kometz, a handful, from the flour, and then he puts it on the Mizbeach. When he does all that, he takes the flour and burns it on the Mizbeach. That is called a matir. That term is going to come up a lot today. A matir is a permitter that permits the rest of the flour, the leftovers that were in the bowl after he took the kometz, it permits the kohanim to eat the rest of it. For most types of korban mincha offerings, all that you take is a kometz and burn it on the mizbeach. The rest of it can be eaten by kohanim. And so, that kometz that he puts on his mizbeach is a matir, and the kohanim cannot partake of the rest of the meal offering until that matir is placed on the mizbeach. So we have the matir, and then the part that is permitted to consume. Now, if when the Kohen takes the kometz, he has intention that it will be consumed after the proper time, either that kometz or the rest of the flour, either the altar will eat it or the people will eat it after the proper time, then that becomes pigul. And once he does the whole process, then the rest of the flour is pigul. If someone would eat any of that flour, that is pigul, and they would be liable to karet. That is the standard case where one is liable to karet. Now this Mishnah teaches that if one would eat the flour, the kometz that he put, that was taken and put on the mizbeach, you take, now it's burning, you take some of it and eat it, one is not liable to karet. So again, this is a case where he takes a kometz. While he's taking the kometz, he has in mind that it's going to be consumed after the time. And then he puts it on the mizbeach. If he would eat the leftover of the flour, that's pigul, and they'll be liable. But not the kometz itself. Why? The basic principle of this Mishnah is one is liable for eating pigul only if one eats the consumable part, not if one eats the matir. Now remember that the Kohen who actually makes it pigul, he is also violating a prohibition of causing it to be pigul. So he, by having that intention and then doing the whole process when he puts the ketoret on, because he had wrong intention when he took the kemitzah, so now he made it pigul, so he violates. But we're not talking about that violation of making it pigul, we're talking about the violation of eating pigul. And so the violation of eating pigul only applies to the parts that would be consumable if you did everything properly, that you're allowed to eat it. Either the person is allowed to eat it or the mizbeach is allowed to eat it. But the part that is itself the matir, that does not count. You don't get karet for eating the matir itself. Okay, so now we can go through the list. The kometz, that's the matir for the rest of the flour. Ketoret is entirely burned, so there is no consumable part, since that's the burnt part, so there's no pigul status on that. Lebona needs to be put on the mizbeach in order to permit the rest of the meal offering. Uminchat kohanim, if a kohen brings a korban mincha, then none of it is edible. That's the general law. Even if it's a regular korban mincha, that if a Yisrael would bring it, the kohanim can eat it. But if a kohen brings it, then no kohanim eat it, nobody eats it. All of it is burnt. Since all of it is burnt, you don't say that part of it is a matir for the rest of it, because all of it's burnt. So all of it is a matir, and none of it is consumable. And so therefore that a pigul prohibition will not apply to it. Uminchat kohen mashiach, the kohen gadol brings a korban mincha every day, and that's entirely burnt. So there is no consumable part. It's all the matir. Vehadam. Now blood, this is for an animal offering, and here also we can go through the same exercise. In a regular case of an animal offering, one does shechita, he collects the blood. Let's say he has proper intention. Good. So everything is good, and he sprinkles the blood. Once he sprinkles the blood, let's say it's a korban shelamim. Okay, so now you go back to the animal, and some of the animal, the inner parts, the emurim, they will be placed on the mizbeach, consumed by the mizbeach, and the rest of the meat will be consumed by anyone. The people who brought it, they can share it with anyone who is tahor. So there's a matir, that's the blood, and there's the consumable part. If someone, while doing shechita, has in mind that it will be consumed after the time, well, in that case, and then you do the whole process, it will become pigul. So that means that person that did that, he violates the law of making it pigul. But we're not talking about that prohibition here. We're talking about someone who consumes. Well, someone who consumes the rest of the meat of that shelamim. Well, that someone who eats it, the eating of that prohibited food, because it's pigul food, he violates and gets karet. But what if he would eat the blood? Well, that blood was the matir. It would be a prohibition of eating blood, but we're not talking about the prohibition of eating blood. If he ate the blood, he would not be liable karet for pigul, because the blood is the matir. One is only liable if one eats the part that is consumable. And so too, והנכסים הבאים בפני עצמן דברי רבי מאיר, חכמים אומרים אף הבאים עם הבהמה. נכסים, libation offerings, wine, or other things that go along, could be a meal offering also, that are brought. Let's talk about wine. A wine offering can be brought in two ways. It's called here bifnei atzman. How can it be brought by itself? One can donate a wine offering by itself. That's an acceptable donation. Now, that does not have a matir. You don't have to do anything first in order to put that wine, pour it onto the mizbeach. It's all poured on the mizbeach. So therefore, it doesn't have a matir, and therefore, it doesn't matter if one has in mind that he's going to put this on at the wrong time. It's not going to become pigul. This is also another way to bring yayin nesech, is together with a korban. When you bring a korban shelamim, a korban olah, along with it, you have to also bring a wine libation. In that case, it depends according to Rabbi Meir. If you're bringing it on a separate day, which is permitted, you can bring the korban itself, the animal, on one day, and you have the wine, and the kohanim could say, we don't have time today, and they bring the wine on the next day. That's totally allowed. And so if you bring it on a different day, then it's considered separate. It's brought bifnei atzman, and therefore no pigul prohibition will apply to that wine, according to the Rabbi Meir. However, according to the Rabbi Meir, if it's brought with the animal on the same day as the animal, then different story. Then we consider the sprinkling of the blood of the animal to be the matir, because only once you sprinkle the blood, then you go and get the rest of the parts of the animal that will be burnt and the wine, and you bring the wine and pour it on the mizbeach. In that case, if one had pigul intention while doing the services for that animal korban, and then you did the blood, you sprinkled the blood, since the blood is a matir, then therefore the wine that's being brought together with it will have the status of pigul, and someone who drinks that wine will be liable to karet, according to the Rabbi Meir. Hachamim disagree and say, no, even if you bring it on the same day, that wine on the same day as the animal, still consider something separate. Since you could bring it separately, you could wait till tomorrow. So even though you happen to be bringing it today, we don't say that the blood is a matir for the wine, but rather the wine is a standalone, according to Chachamim. Now, more things. Log shemen shel mesora. Rabbi Shimon omer en hayavin alav mishum pigul. Rabbi Meir omer hayavin alav mishum pigul. Shedam ha'asham matiro. Next thing on the list is the log of oil that a mesora brings. When someone is a mesora and he wants to be purified, he has to first bring a korban asham, and that it's slaughtered, and the blood is sprinkled on the mizbeach, and then some of the blood is taken and you dab it on the ear and the thumb and the toe of the mesorah. In addition, he also has to bring a log of oil, and that log of oil is sprinkled towards the kodesh and also dabbed onto the mesorah's ear and thumb and toe. Now, according to Rabbi Shimon, if one drank the oil, the rest of the oil that's left over, in fact, Kohanim are allowed to drink. They can consume it. So if you do everything properly, the oil is a consumable product. Now, what if during the Korban Asham, one had pigul intention, making that Korban into giving it pigul status? According to Rabbi Shimon, that does not affect the oil, because according to him, the oil is independent of the Korban. You could do the oil later, you could do it on a later day. And so, we don't consider the blood of the Asham to be a matir for the oil, according to Rabbi Shimon. However, Rabbi Meir disagrees, and he says that if you have pigul intention for the asham, then the oil does become pigul, and someone who consumes the oil will be liable to karet, because according to Rabbi Meir, the blood of the asham is a matir. You don't sprinkle the is a matir for the oil. You don't sprinkle the oil first. You wait until you did the blood. And therefore, the blood is considered an asham. How does this is considered a matir, and the oil will be pigul? Has Rabbi Meir square with this opinion of Rabbi Meir? The Gemara on tomorrow's daf will discuss, and this might only apply if in fact you do it on the same day. וכל שיש לו מתירין בין לאדם בין למזבח חייבים עליו משום פיגול. And now here's a general rule. Anything that you have to wait for a matir, something you have to put blood or a kometz or something, you have to do something first in order for that thing to be permitted for consumption, whether it's consumption by a person eating it or by the burning it on the mizbeach. Either way, one would be liable for pigul. But if it's the matir itself, or something that doesn't require a matir, then one would not be liable for consuming that item as pigul. And now more examples. Ha'ola damaha matir et besara lamizbeach ve'ora la kohanim. If you have a korban ola, only once you sprinkle the blood onto the mizbeach, then you're allowed to take the rest of the flesh of the animal and put it on the altar. And therefore, if one has pigul intention during the shechita or kabbalah or any of the four basic avodot, then the flesh of the animal will become pigul. Okay, so that's because it has a matir. And also the skin of a korban olah is not burnt on the mizbeach. The kohanim get it, but the kohanim cannot take it home and use it until the blood is sprinkled on the mizbeach. So there you go. That's an example of the blood being a matir for the rest of it. Ola ta'of dama matir et besara la mizbeach. Ola. This is examples of ola where a person is not consuming any of it. This is only consumed by the mizbeach, but the point is that taking all this stuff, and if you put it on the mizbeach before the matir, it's not yet pigul. Only after the matir, then if you did everything right, then it would be permitted to consume. So that if you do with pigul intention, it's only chayav karet after you finish doing the matir. So if it's a bird, where you don't have the skin of the bird is not important, but the whole thing is burnt. So once you sprinkle the blood of the bird, then all the rest of the flesh, that's a matir that you can put the flesh on afterwards. Chatat ta'of dama matiret besara la kohanim. But now here's something that is consumable by people. A korban chatat, that's a bird. The blood is sprinkled, and then it's permitted for the kohanim to eat it's the rest of the flesh. And so that would be an example where the blood itself that you put on the mizbech, if you drank that, there would be no pigul because that's the matir. However, if one would if the bird became pigul and then one ate the meat, then one would be liable karet for eating that meat because it does have a pigul status, because it does have a matir. Parim anisrafim us'irim anisrafim taman matir et emurehen li karev. Now, regarding the parim and se'irim that are burnt outside of the mikdash, this is like the par and sa'ir for Yom Kippur. Those, you slaughter them, you sprinkle the blood only in the Kodesh, not on the outside Mizbeach. And then you take the meat and it's burnt, not on the part of it. The emurim, the innards are burnt on the outside Mizbeach, but then the rest of the animal is burnt outside of the mikdash altogether. So when it comes to those types of korbanot, their blood is a matir for the innards, so that once you sprinkle the blood, then the innards have a pigul status. But what about the rest of it that's burnt outside? If one would eat the rest of it that's burnt outside, that would not count as pigul, because those are not consumable on the altar, and something only becomes pigul if it's something that, when you did everything right, it would be permitted to consume it on the altar or by people. And so there would be a prohibition of eating pigul for those things, but for so that would apply to the emurim that you do normally put on the mizbeach. However, the rest of the animal that is burnt outside of the Bet HaMikdash altogether, that if one ate it, one would not be liable to for pigul. Rabbi Shimon Omer, Kol she'eno al hamizbeach hachison kishlamim en chayavin alab mishum pigul. Rabbi Shimon disagrees. He's even more lenient and says, any animal that you do not sprinkle the blood on the outside mizbeach, like here, where you do burn parts of it on the outside mizbeach, but the blood is only sprinkled inside the hechal. So any animal that is not, the blood is not sprinkled on the outside mizbeach, like a shelamim is. A shelamim, you do burn it. And all the laws of pigul, we learn from shelamim. And so therefore, just like shelamim, you apply the blood to the outside mizbeach, so too, pigul only applies to any korban where the blood is applied to the outside mizbeach, and therefore these cows and goats that are burnt, that are sprinkled only in the inside, pigul does not apply to them, and therefore if one eats any part of those animals, one will not be liable karet for pigul. Amar Ola, komes pigul sheha'ilo al gabe hamizbeach, paka pigulo mimenu, im acherim ebi lide pigul, hu asmo lo kol sheken. Ola says an enigmatic statement. It's hard to make sense of this. The Gemara will make several attempts. A kometz, the part of the meal offering that one puts in one's hands and then put it on the mizbeach, if it's pigul, meaning you took the kometz having in mind that it will be consumed at the wrong time, and one put it on the mizbeach, then its pigul status is gone. It's removed. How so? What's his reasoning? If other things bring it to pigul, meaning when you do some other action, like the taking of the kometz, that makes it pigul, so it itself, all the more so, meaning putting it on the mizbeach, all the more so will make it pigul. This is hard to understand because he said when you put it on the mizbeach, it's not pigul. And then he gave an argument that seems to argue why it would be pigul. So we ask, Mai Kamar, what is Ula saying? Hachi Kamar, im eno mitkabel heach mebi acherim lide pigul. What he's meaning to say is, if this korban is not acceptable because you had a pigul thought beforehand, and now you put this flour on the mizbeach, it's not acceptable. If it's not acceptable, how could it make the rest of the meal offering that is still in the bowl make it pigul? Because something is only pigul if you do the whole process properly. And now you never actually did the haktara properly because it's pigul. My kamashmala. Now, what is Ula teaching us? What's the chidush here? Iden chayavin alab mishum pigul tanena. Elu devarim shen chayavin alehem mishum pigul. Hakom hakomes v'aketoret v'halebona minchat kohanim minchat kon Mashiach minchat nesachim v'hadam. Is Ula trying to teach us that that kemitzah, the flour that you have in your hand, if that you put on the mizbeach and you had in mind to consume it after the time, if you eat that kometz itself, then one is not liable to pigul. Is that what he's trying to say? Right? Because now you put it on the mizbeach, so it's that's not even a haktara because it's pigul. So he's trying to say that the kometz is not liable to pigul if you eat it. That can't be what he's teaching us, because that's explicitly what our Mishnah just said. These are the things for which one is not liable to pigul, and it counted komes and then also ketot and nebona or minchat kohanim. These are all things that are the matir, or things that are entirely burnt on the mizbeach, kon Mashiach minchat nesachim, and the blood, which is a matir for something else. So we already know from the Mishnah that if one eats the kometz itself, then one is not liable karet for pigul. So Ula is not going to just repeat what it already says in the Mishnah. Ela di'im alu lo yirdu. Maybe Ula is teaching us that if you put it on, you're not supposed to put it on because it's pigul, but if you put it on the mizbeach, and then if it's already there, don't take it off. Maybe that's what he's teaching me. Because once you put it on, okay, so now it's up there already. Tanena halan v'yosev atamesh nishhat chutz lizmano v'chutz limkomo im alu lo yerdu. We also know that from a Mishnah later on in this Masechet that says meat that was left overnight and meat that was sacrificial meat that was taken out of the temple, or sacrificial meat that became tameh, or sacrificial meat that you do shechita, having in mind that one would consume it after the right time or outside the place, you shouldn't put it on the mizbeach lechatechila. This is no good. It's pasul. But if you already put it up, then leave it up there. So if he's teaching us that, then that's what he says by pagat pigulo mimenu. Once you put it up there, okay, now it was pigul, you shouldn't put it up. Once it's up, now it's not considered pigul anymore, and you can leave it there. We know that from a Mishnah. So Ula wouldn't be repeating a Mishnah. Ve'ela de'im yardu ya'alu. Or maybe he meant that if you put it up and then it fell off, then you should put it back on. Maybe yardu ya'alu, you should put it back on again, because once you put it on, you're prohibited from putting it on. But once you put it on and it's burnt, now it's permitted, it's not pigul anymore, so if it falls off, you can put it back on. Hanametenena, but we learned about that also in a Mishnah. Keshem she'im alu lo yerdu, kach im yerdu lo ya'alu. The Mishnah says actually not so. Just like if you put it on, don't take it off, so too, if it falls off, don't put it back on. So actually the law is don't put it back on. So it can't be that Allah is saying that you can put it back on. And the answer is La siricha shemashla behen ha'or. Ula is talking about a case where the fire already took hold of it. In other words, you have this thing, pigul. You shouldn't put it on the mizbeach. Let's say you violated that and you put it on the mizbeach. Well, now, if the fire took hold of it, now it's already considered burnt. Not pigul anymore. If it falls off, you can put it back on. But that's Ula's law. But the Mishnah was saying that if this is pigul, you shouldn't put it on. Okay, once you put it on, don't take it off. But if it falls off, don't put it back on. That's when the fire has not yet taken hold of it, so it's still pigul. Don't put it back on. Now this, although we don't know this from a Mishnah, Ula himself said this another time. Why did Ula have to say it twice? Damar Ula, lo shanu ela shelo mashla behen ha'ur, aval mashla behen ha'ur ya'alu. He said that when do we say that something that fell off the mizbeach, do not put it back on? That's if the fire has not taken hold of it. But if the fire did take hold of it, that's it. It's not pigul anymore, and you can put it back on. So he already said that. So why do you say it again? He said that statement regarding limbs of an animal, not a meal offering, because the limbs of an animal are all connected together. And therefore, you'd say, oh, in that case, since part of it was already burnt, so then it's all connected. So that's why, if part of it was burnt and it's connected, that's why you could put it back up. Aval komes de mifrat Emala, kamashmalan. But I might have thought that when it comes to a handful of flour, which is all separate pieces, and I put it up, it was pigul. I was supposed to put it up, but I put it up. And now part of it got burnt and fell off. In that case, I might have thought only the part that got burnt I could put back on, but not the rest of it that was not burnt. And therefore, Ula comes to teach us this statement again to say that even the part that was not burnt, you put it back up. Although it's not physically connected like parts of an animal are, nevertheless, the whole kometz is considered one entity. And if part of it was burnt, fire took hold of it, then you can put the rest of it on as well. Amar Rav Achai, Hilka Chai Komes Pigul, te falge machet ar'a, ufalge aseke ma'aracha, umashla bo ha'ur, masekna lechule lehatechila. Rav Achai says, therefore, since you consider the entire kometz to be one unit, if you had a handful of pigul and half of it was on the ground and half of it was put on the mizbech, again, it was not allowed to do that, but someone did it anyway, and fire took hold of it, then the rest of it also you can put on the mizbech because it's all one entity, and it's already, once the fire takes hold, it removes the label of pigul, so that's why the rest of it also you can put up. Amar Rabbi Yitzchak, Amar Rabbi Yochanan, ha-pigul v'hanotar v'hatameh shehelan l'gabei mizbeach paka isur mehen. Rabbi Yochanan says a similar law regarding other things too. If you have some meat or a sacrificial offering that is pigul, or it was left over the time, or it's tameh, then you put it on the mizbeach. You're not allowed to put these things on mizbeach, but once you do, then they're not considered prohibited anymore. Amar Rav Chisda, Mare dichi mizbech mikveh tahara. Rav Chisda heard this law and he said, the teacher of this law, how could this be? Is the mizbeach a mikveh? If you take something tameh and dip it in the mikveh, it becomes tahor. But something tameh, you put it on the mizbeach, and now it's tahor. How could the mizbeach act like a mikveh? Amar Rabbi Zera, shemashla behen ha'ur. Rabbi Zera says no. It's only a case where the fire took hold of it. Once the fire took hold of it, it changes it. It's no longer the thing that it was, and so that's it. The prohibition is gone. Metiv Rabbi Yitzchak bar Bisna, Acherim Omrim, v'tumato alav, mi shetumato porachat mimenu, yasa basar she'en tuma porachat mimenu, v'im ita hare tuma porachat mimenu al yedeh ha'ur. We're going to challenge the statement of Rabbi Zera from a Baraita that quotes the pasuk in Vayikra that says, anyone eats meat of a shelamim offering, and tumato alav, with impurity on him. What does that mean? That means it applies to the person. It's not clear in the pasuk. Is the person eating it tameh and he gets karet, or is it the meat that's tameh? And that's why he gets cut for eating a tameh sacrifice. So the Midrash says that if it's talking about the person, it's a person where the tum'ah can leave him, because a person can always go to the mikveh and then he won't be tameh anymore. Tumato alav, currently he's tameh, but he could get out of his tum'ah. But that will exclude basar, the meat itself, where you cannot take off the tum'ah. Now, that's the case. The Baraita assumes that you cannot remove tum'ah from sacrificial meat. Now, if Rabbi Zera was correct, then there is a way. Tum'ah leaves by burning it on the fire. So there is a way for a tum'ah to leave. And therefore, this pasuk could be talking about where the meat is tameh. This Baraita proves that you cannot remove the tum'ah of meat by putting it on the fire. So challenge to the previous statement. Amar Rava al yedeh mikveh ka'amrinan. Rava says, no, we're talking about through a mikveh. Meat, you cannot dip into a mikveh. If you put it on the fire, yes, then the tumah will leave it. But this Baraita was saying that this law, this pasuk, applies to a person who can be purified through a mikveh, and not a meat which cannot be purified through a mikveh. Wait, midi mikveh ketiv, but does the pasuk say mikveh? It just says cannot tumato. It is tameh now, which means it cannot be purified. It sounds like in any way. It doesn't say only through a mikveh. Ela marav papa bebasar shelamim askinan de la chazi lahakrava. Rav Papa explains we're talking about the meat of a shelamim offering that the people are supposed to eat. You can't put that on the altar, and that's what it's talking about. And in fact, it is talking about a korban shelamim, and so that's what it's talking about. That you can't put it on the Mizbeach and thereby purify it, because this meat doesn't go on the Mizbeach at all. And so that's the case where it must be the person, because he can become mikveh, but the meat itself, you can't put it in a mikveh, and it's a shelamim, so you can't put it on the Mizbeach either. Ravina Amar, v'tumato alav, mi shetum'a porachat mimenu keshehu shalem. Yasa basar davar she'en tumato porachat keshehu shalem, ela keshehu haser. Ravina offers a different answer, and he says the word tumato alav, that is referring to something where the tum'ah can leave it while it's whole. That's talking about the person who's eating it. He is tameh. Tumah is upon him, but if he goes to the mikveh while whole, he's one person, he's all put together, and he goes into the mikveh, and then it leaves him while whole. This does not apply to flesh, where the tumah does not leave it while it's whole, but rather only when it's burnt. So once it's burnt, it's already missing, it's already deficient, it changes its form. Unlike a person goes to the mikveh, comes out, he's still the same as he was before, he just dries off. But the meat has to become deficient in order to become tahor. And so therefore, that's a good proof of tumato alav. But indeed, once it does become deficient and fire takes hold of it, then indeed, as Rav Chisda said, the tum'ah will leave it. And so that's how we can answer this statement, this question of Rabbi Yitzchak bar Bisna, that although the Baraitot was talking about how something that can be purified when whole and not destroyed at all, that applies to a person, but not flesh. But indeed, if once it's deficient, yes, flesh of a korban can become purified by being placed on the mizbeach and the fire take hold of it. Gufa v'tumato ala b'tumata gufa katu medaber. Now we go back and cite the full baraita. We quoted just the end of it, acherim amaru, above, but now we're going to cite the entire thing. The question is regarding this pasuk in Vayikra 7:20. It says hanefesh, which means a person, asher tochal basar. Notice that the word tochal is nekeva, because the word nefesh is nekeva, although it's talking about any person, including a male. Basar mizebach hashelamim ashel Adonai. So, if a person eats the flesh of a zevach shelamim, v'tumato alav, and the tumah is upon, this could mean it, meaning the korban, or him, the person eating it. That's what's not clear. And anyway, v'nichreta nefesh hahi me'ameha, hahi is nekeva, because again it's going on the word nefesh, although it would apply to anyone, a man or a woman, who does this prohibition. Now we're going to notice that the next pasuk is a repetition, and this is going to come into play soon. V'nefesh ki tiga bechol tameh ve'betum'at adam o bebhema teme'a o bechol shekes tameh ve'achal mi bezar sebach asher mashal Adonai v'nichreta nefesh hahi me'ameha. A person, tiga is again nekeva, if he touches anything tameh, various types of tum'ah, and he eats zebach from the flesh of zebach hashelamim. V'nichreta hanefesh hahi me'ameha. Now the second pasuk 21 is clearly talking about a person who is tameh. Says he touched all these things, so that is for sure clear. But the first pasuk is not clear. So now we're going to try to figure it out. V'tumato alav, the Midrash says, we're talking about tumat haguf, meaning the person is tameh. Ata omer b'tumat haguf o eno ela b'tumat basar. The structure of Midrash Halacha is to give the hypothesis and then to question it. Is that true? It's talking about that the person is tameh. Maybe it's that the flesh is tameh. So here's answer number one. Ne'emar kan tumato v'ne'emar lehalan tumato bo. Ma lehalan b'tumat haguf hakatu medaber, afkan b'tumat haguf hakatu medaber. Gezerah Shava says here the word tumato, and it says in Parashat Chukat regarding the para aduma, if his tumato alav. Clearly the para aduma case is talking about a person who touched a corpse and he is tameh. So just like over there, that's Tumah of the person, so to here is Tumah of the person. That is proof number one. Rabbi Yosef Omer, Ho'il v'ne'emru kodashim b'lshon rabim, v'ne'emra Tumah b'lshon yachid, b'tumat haguf ha'katuv medaber. Rabbi Yosef says, look at the number. It says here, Nefesh shetocha basar. That's one person. If a person eats flesh. And then it says Zevach Shelamim. Shelamim is plural. So therefore, if the To'alav was referring to the Korban, it should have said Tumatam Alehem in plural. Instead, it's in singular because it's referring to the person. That's Rabbi Yosef's proof. Rabbi Omer ve'achal betumat haguf hakatub medaber. Rabbi Yehuda Nasi says from the word achal ve'achal in the next pasuk that we can learn that this pasuk also is talking about tumah of the person. It's not clear how Rabbi is learning from the next pasuk that this pasuk also is. The Gemara will elaborate. Acherim ameru v'tumato alav mi shetumah porachat mimenu yasa basar she'en tumah porachat mimenu. Acherim, this is the part we cited above, say that the words v'tumato alav refers to someone who is currently tameh, but he can do something. A person can go to the mikveh and the tumah will leave him. However, the flesh of the animal, there is no way to make the tumah leave it. And that's true. You can burn it on the mizbeach and then it will leave it, but it won't be whole in the same way. So you don't say alav because then it's already going to be consumed, partially consumed, and that's what we discussed above. That's the end of the Baraita. Amar mor, Rabbi Omer ve'achal betumat haguf hakatuv medaber. So now Rabbi said that since it says the word achal in pasuk 21, it must be that this pasuk 20 also is talking about tumah of the person. How do you know? My mashma. Amar Rava kol kera de la mefaresh le Rav Yitzchak bar Avudimi v'chol matnita de la mefaresha la Rav Ze'iri la mi parsha. Rava says, any pasuk that you did not hear an explanation of it from Rav Yitzchak bar Avudimi, he was an expert in explaining pesukim. And any baraita that was not explained by Rav Ze'iri has not been explained. And so these were the two experts, one in Mikra, one in Baraitot, and therefore, if you ever find a difficult pasuk, then you should always look to a teaching of Rav Yitzchak bar Avudimi in order to interpret it. And luckily, we have a tradition from him about this pasuk. Hachi amar Rav Yitzchak bar Avudimi. Ho'ilu patach hakatuv b'lshon nekeva, v'siyem b'lshon nekeva, u'lshon zachar ba'emsa, betumat haguf hakatuv medaber. So he explains, look in this pasuk 21, it starts off with nekeva. It ends with nekeva and has zachar in the middle, and that's talking about clearly Tumat haguf. This is here. Nefesh ki tiga. That's a nekeva. And nechata nefesh ahi. That's also a nekeva. Now, even though in the middle it says ve'achal, not ve'achela, and so you might think that ve'achal must be referring to the flesh of the animal because it's a different gender. If it was talking about the person, hanefesh, it should have said ki tiga, so then ve'achela should have been in nekeva. And so that would be an indication that it's talking about that the meat is tameh. However, in this pasuk, it's clear it's talking about the person because the person touched something tameh. And therefore, once we know that, we can come back to this pasuk where also you would have such an objection and say, Nefesh is nekeba. Nefesh, again, at the end is nekeba. Tum'ato alav is zachar. Maybe that's referring to the Zevaḥ HaShelamim. And so therefore it's the Zevaḥ HaShelamim that is tameh. Otherwise, it should have said, V'tum'ata aleha. However, since this pasuk we see, although it says tameh ve'achal in zachar, and yet it refers to the person, so here also, although it's zachar, it certainly can refer to the person. And so, even though the B's statement was quite short, but we can tell exactly what he means. Matnita. Now we're going to cite a Baraita, and we just mentioned that if you don't have a Ze'iri's understanding of a Baraita, then you won't understand it. So we are going to quote a quite difficult Baraita and offer a few different explanations and land finally on that of Ze'iri. So here we go, the Tanya. Im ne'emru kalot, lama ne'emru hamurot. Ve'im ne'emar hamurot, lama ne'emar kalot. It's not clear what this Baraita is referring to, but it's referring to some pisukim in the Torah about tum'ah and eating food that's tameh, terumah, maaser. We're going to see what it's referring to. And the question is, why does the Torah have to mention lenient laws and stringent laws? If it says the lenient ones, why mention the stringent ones? If it has the stringent ones, why do you need also the leniencies? Im ne'emar kalot v'lo chamorot hayiti omer ala kalot belav ala chamorot b'mita lakach ne'emar chamorot. The Baraita answers the question and says, if it said only the kalot and not the chamorot, I would think, on the kalot, there it's just a lav. If one does something, eats these tumah things in a lenient status, that's a lav. Then I would have assumed that for the hamur cases, one would be liable to mita. Mita always means here, mita beidei shamayim. And therefore says the chamurot, so that I don't think that the chamurot are also bemita. ואם נאמר חמורות ולא נאמרו קלות, הייתי אומר על החמורות יהיה חייב, ועל הקלות יהיה פטור, לכך נאמר קלות. And if it mentioned only the chamurot and not the kalot, I would say, for the chamurot, one is liable, but for the kalot, one is not liable at all. And therefore, it does have to mention the kalot. So I know that although one would not be liable to mita, but one is still liable as a lav. Now, my kalot umay chamurot. What is it talking about? Ilema kalot maaser, chamurot temura. Perhaps lenient is the leniency of maaser sheni. Eating maaser sheni while tameh, that is a lav. Chamurot is teruma, where eating teruma while tameh is mita bidei shamayim. So is that what this is talking about? Well, does that fit? Hayiti omer b'mita, hashtanameh ha b'mita. What do you mean that said, if it said only kalot, then I would have said, the kalot are a lav, but the chamurot are mita. And that's why I need the chamurot to say not mita. So that means the chamurot are not mita. But that's not true, because if it's the chamurot are teruma, so the teruma, if someone eats teruma while tameh, in fact, the punishment is mita bidei shamayim. So that doesn't fit the wording. Vetu, ilo ne'emar hayiti omer b'mita, dayola ba min hadin liyot kanidon. And furthermore, why would I even make that inference in the first place? We have a rule that it's sufficient to learn something only what is found in the source. And if the source is, the kalot, if it said only kalot, that's maaser sheni. For that is only a lav. Well, in that case, which is maaser sheni is more lenient than teruma. Teruma is a higher status of holiness. So then you'd say, it's at least as much. But I can only learn that it's prohibited as a lav. I cannot, with the kal vachomer, go further than that. So I wouldn't even learn that it is mita anyway. So this doesn't fit in multiple ways. Ela kalot tumat sheres, chamurot tumat met. Rather, it's referring to the type of tum'ah, not the type of food. And so kalot is a person who becomes tameh through a sheretz. Chamurot is a person who becomes tameh by touching a corpse, which is a higher level. And so tumat sheretz, if someone eats something while tameh sheretz, it's only a lav. If he eats something while tameh tumat met, it will be mita bidei shamayim. So we ask, ubemai, what is he eating? If he's eating teruma, it doesn't matter whether he's tumat sheretz or tumat met. He will get he's chayav mita bidei shamayim. Vetu lekach ne'emru chamurot debelav ha b'mitahi. And furthermore, when the Baraita says that's why it has to tell me chamurot, so that you don't think that it's mita, it's only a lav. But that's not true, because if someone eats teruma, it would in fact be b'mita. The next words are in parentheses. We're not going to read them. V'i ba'achilat maaser. So maybe it's talking again. Kalot is tumat sheretz, chamurot is tumat met, and it's talking about if someone someone who's tameh with that status eats maaser sheni. Im lo nemru chamorot, hayiti omer al chamorot b'mita, ha mitumat sheres katya, ve'dayola ba min hadin liot kanidon. So in that case, if you did not say the chamorot, then what? I would have said that, if you eat maaser sheni with you have corpse impurity, then it would be mita. But where are you deriving that from? You're deriving it from tumat sheretz, where maaser sheni is a lav. Okay, so now we know tumat sheretz is liable for a lav. Now you're going to say, and now if it's tumat met, then that's worse. But we have a rule, dayola bominadin. You can only learn from something sufficient from what that law is. And therefore, you'd say, okay, so then in the case of tameh met that eats maaser sheni, so it's at least as bad, but we can only learn that that's a lav, not that it would be mita. That would violate, otherwise that would violate this rule. So we're stuck. We cannot figure out what this Baraitot means. Comes to the rescue. Amar ze'iri kalot tumat sheres, chamorot tumat met. Indeed, as we just said, the kalot is referring to the type of tumat sheres. Chamorot is tumat met. But here's how to solve the problem. Here's how to explain it. V'hachi ka'amar, ilu ne'emar tumat sheres v'ne'emar maaser utruma, v'lo ne'emar tumat met. If the Torah had given us the law regarding tumat sheretz and mentioned both maaser and teruma, but did not say what the law would be for tumat met. So in other words, it would say that for someone tameh tumat sheretz who eats maaser would be a lav, and for teruma would be mita. But it didn't tell us what the law is for tumat met. So then I would have extrapolated as follows: Hayiti omer kalot ala kalot belav. If you eat the less stringent type of tum'ah, meaning maaser sheni, when one is the less stringent type of tameh, meaning tumat sheretz, that's a lav. Vala hamurot b'mita. But if someone is the light level of tumat sheretz, but eats the stringent tameh item, meaning teruma, then that would be mita. So in other words, when you have 1 and 1, then it's mita. Now, if that's true, then I would learn a parallel case of switching it around. Umidekalot al chamorot b'mita, chamorot nameh al kalot b'mita. Since when someone is tameh only tumat sheretz and he eats chamorot teruma, he's mita, then maybe the other way around also. If one is tameh lamet, the more stringent type of tumah, eating the less stringent type of item, maaser sheni, also b'mita. And that would be a viable way of learning because those are equal cases. So I might come to that conclusion, which is not true because someone who eats maaser sheni does not get mita bidei shamayim, even if they are tameh lamet. Lekach ne'emru chamurot. That's why the Torah has to say explicitly that someone who is tameh lamet, who eats teruma, will be chayav mita, to say only that person gets chayav mita. But someone who is tameh, even if they're tameh lamet, but they eat only maaser sheni, then they do not get chayav mita. It's only a lav. Baruch Adonai le'olam. Amen ve'amen.